Hello and welcome to Inside Masters Minds. Inside Masters Mind is a podcast where we dive deep into leaders in health, business, sports, entrepreneurship, as top people in their industry share their successful insights on how they got to where they are today. Today, I have a dear friend of mine and a close heart centered brother, Mark Kelton. Mark is originally from California and is now based in Texas. He has gone through leaps and bounds in his internal world, from being a college partier to being a monk to running his own financial consulting business to allow him to surf the world, and he's now hunting turkeys. With one of his biggest passions, creating music that helps heals people's soul. My good friend and my spiritual brother, Mark Kelton, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm so excited because this is the first ever podcast. So it's an exciting time for me, and I appreciate you coming on.
Hell yeah, man. I'm happy for the forward momentum.
Yes, yes, the momentum is everything. So why don't we start out by laying a foundation for the listeners? You're one of the few people that I've actually come across on my journey through my transformation that has had a similar journey to me. Um, Can you lay a little bit of foundation of how all this got started from you from back in the college days and being a partier to transitioning to be a monk? It's such a cool journey.
Right. So, to lay clarification to anybody listening, I wasn't like technically a monk at an ashram. It was sort of a de facto monk, an aesthetic, if you will, testing out principles of yoga, um, obvious, and meditation and all that. So, basically, when I was a kid, I always felt I had sort of an intuitive understanding of truth. When people tell you stuff when you're a kid, many of us, I think, have an intuitive awareness to when we're being told the truth or when we're being lied to, and we're lied to a lot as children, even if we're in a healthy family unit sort of environment. I'm sure. So just because we're young and they think we don't know any better, but at a very young age, I had an insight into. I could tell when people were lying to me and when people were also maybe lying to themselves. I could sense uh, sort of, I don't know the term to use, but people tell themselves things that they accept as truths that may inherently be flawed logic or just some illusion that they're basing then a lifetime's worth of decisions off of, a false truth, if you will. Um, and so that was in me from childhood. And then as I dealt with traumas as most of us do in childhood, and um, those kind of kept me hampered down in a way. Uh, I'm both introspective and extroverted, um, uh, and so at the time, I kind of was in the introversion state of being and meditating on all this stuff all through my adolescence and as a teenager and young adulthood. And then when I got to college, I sort of gave myself up to that experience and with the intent of breaking myself out of being just a perpetual introvert and exposing myself to anything and everything that I um, thought might help me break that chain and be comfortable in a sociological setting. And so I drank a lot and I partied and I helped run parties and like did the whole thing and snowboarding and all that jazz. And so, but about maybe 18 months into that process, I started to get disenfranchised with it because I didn't feel like I was. I could tell that by drinking and then not getting proper rest and not having other things in balance that needed to be there, I wasn't growing as much as I could be in any given day. And by looking at my circle of friends and the people around me who were really deep into the partying aspect of it all, I saw that they weren't evolving. And so I hit this node or this point of, well, why am I doing this? and why are we all doing this, and what is, how do I break out of it, and like what else is there? I wasn't gaining any answers or insights into sort of the human condition. I gained some answers that this maybe has a function, this partying thing has a function, but it only has a certain threshold or limit of how far it can go to you know grow you as a person. And so coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, but serendipitously, I then, while I was in college, my great aunt, who was a nun for many years, her and her life partner Joan was also a nun. I encountered them when I was like 21, 22 in college, and they started offering literature. They could basically, we had a meeting. My grandmother was there, my mother was there, and they sort of interacted with them, and then they like honed in on me, and they're like, "Where are you at? What's going on?" And they were nuns, and then they like left the Catholic Church and became sort of energy workers for like the last 30 years, like from the 70s onward. Um, they're still alive today, and so they had a very deep insight into spirituality and the human condition and the processes of evolution within. And they gave me reference points. They started me out with, I'm going to, list off a series of books, but basically at first it was The Path of the Peaceful Warrior, I believe it's called. I think Dan Millman, that might be wrong, but Path of the Spiritual Warrior or Peaceful Warrior, something like that. That was a good like primer for opening yourself up to the possibilities that there are um, other that there are esoteric ways of self evolution out there and accessible. And it's kind of like a book that they give to like a teenager or a young adult, or even obviously an older person could read it too, but if they haven't you know gone through certain levels of evolution. But it's like a great starting point to open you up to the possibilities, right, that exist. And then from there, I kind of did some of my own searching. They offered some more books. I read the Eckhart Tolle stuff. I read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. I The Structure of Scientific Revolution, awesome book. Talks about how scientific thought and theory, the acceptance of science, how it works its way through the population, basically, like where everybody believes something, and then someone like comes to some realization or truth through scientific research that this is actually what's happening, not the first thing. And then so there's like an evolution of the collective accepting that as truth, and like how that all happens. And so that kind of plays into all of the self-evolution stuff, because I felt like I was alone on an island, so to speak, at 22, basically trying to become like, I mean, I'm going to take ego out of this, but other people might respond in an egoic way. Basically to attain enlightenment, so to speak, become self-aware and conscious of like everything that's going on within, and understand like what is human nature. That was the like I couldn't like articulate it then, but within like the next couple of years, I realized like that's what I was trying to do, like understand what's really going on, because we get taught all these things about from religion and science and media and our parents and like all these things, and it's like you don't really know anything until you test it for yourself. There's information and there's knowledge, right? Like we have all this information, and until you test that information for yourself, you don't really fully know. And so I was on this journey to figure that out. And so when I graduated college, I worked for a year, and I was like, disenfranchised with that experience as well. I was like, I need to figure all this stuff out, all these things that I'm like sort of sharing right now. I needed to meditate on them and like really dive deep and figure them out. And so I'd saved up a bunch of money. I quit my job, and luckily I had a safe place to do this for the next year. And I basically just every day read. I did yoga for several hours every day. I would wake up. I got to a point where I realized early on into this, I've always eaten meat every day in like almost every meal. And so the first thing I did was I became a vegan, and I was only eating fruits and vegetables. I lost like 25, 35 pounds. And then like slowly over the course of a year, I like rebuilt my diet up where, and then I went, where I was basically like a pescatarian at the end of a year. And then I visited my great aunt, same one that recommended all this literature, and she fed me chicken. I was like, oh, all right, well, I guess I can eat meat again. Um, but so the reason I mentioned that, and the reason why it's important, in order to, I think the reason why yoga teachings recommend vegetarianism, and like celibacy, and like all the and daily practice, is because what it allows you to do is harness the energies that are flowing within you and channel them into, for lack of a better term, spiritual awakening. Um, and so for the like the vegetarianism, I think specifically meat holds a ton of uric acid, and so when you remove the meat from your diet, you get rid of all the uric acid influx. And what uric acid does is it gets, from my understanding, goes into your joints and makes everything stiffer. So when you remove the uric acid component from your diet, your body actually becomes more malleable and bendable, which over a long period of time obviously is conducive to growing in a yoga practice, right? You become more flexible, and consequently, so does your mind, or at least that was my experience. And obviously, that's in conjunction with reading hours a day. It's basically spending 16 hours a day on growth. That's what the monk phase is, right? Or what my monkdom was. It was like 16 hours a day where I'd wake up at dawn. I tried to sync my body up to the circadian rhythm of the sun. So I tried to go to bed at sunset and wake up at dawn. And so I'd wake up at like 6:37 every day, get up, do pranayama, which is yoga breathing, and that would clarify my system and oxygenate my cells and add a layer of sort of peace of mind. And then what I found was I would test, like, the more I did that, like every day I did that, I found myself being more productive and more creative than every day that I didn't do it. And so that was like, I can't hear you, by the way. So that was a huge lesson. And then as I grew into all of that over about like 8 or 10 months in, you know, I I was laying in shavasana every night, which is corpse pose in yoga, the laying on your back still, after doing a full day of growth centric reading and exercising. And I was also learning music theory and writing music, and that was a big part of it too, because that's my expression. I hit a point where, unbeknownst to me, without any sort of reading about it, or having any idea that it was going to happen, all of my memories. So here basically, I was reading a book. It's called In Search of the Miraculous. Right? It's really by P.D. Uspensky, I believe, and it talks about a esoteric sort of philosopher slash spiritual guide teacher around the turn of the 20th century, so like the 1800s to the 1900s, and for like about 30 or 40 years, he was teaching people like how to evolve the self, and he was piecing together all these different schools of thought, religion and science, and physics and math, and like music theory. He was basically like trying to create, if you will, thought exercises for people to explore that in a systematic way would help them evolve their internal awareness and understanding of themselves. There's a whole school of thought. I haven't talked to anybody that currently is involved with it, but it's called the Fourth Way. Um, and and so when I was reading the book, there's a couple things that stick out that I remember. One, causality and effect in the universe. He equated it to, or laid the analog of a music scale on top of that, and how like everything is vibrational frequency, right? So basically, to my recollection, uh, in the book, it correlates how every evolution that or learning growth period that we go through, we need at least two external stimuli in that sequence in order to make the full evolution. right, to bridge the gap. Like, and in a music scale, you have 12 in the Western music scale. We have 12 half steps, and the scale goes 2 half step, 2 half step, 2 half step, 1, 2 half step, 1, 2 half step, 2 half step, or something like that, right? And so like each of those 1 half step, note transitions, they would call it a node, right? And so those nodes would equate to, in cause and effect through action, external stimuli. That might be reading a book, that might be interacting with other people to kind of like talk about what you're experiencing, and then through that interaction you then gain insight into what's happening within, and then you're able to bridge the gap and go to the next stage, right? And then so it's just kind of a analog placed over an experience, right? And it might not be like a one-to-one exact, like, okay, this is what's happening, but it gives you sort of a framework to kind of think about and conceptualize, okay, I'm doing something, instead of getting stuck at a node where you think you've done everything you can and you can't bridge the gap. All you need to do to bridge the gap is get external stimuli, and then you'll shift forward. So there was that, and then also kind of looking at the body as a machine, right? Because in a let's say in an esoteric sort of understanding, of the mechanisms, or the mechanism that is the human form, it functions like a machine, or a machine functions like the human form, maybe, right? And so like it has inherent and consistent programs, and requires certain inputs and delivers certain outputs. So by understanding how that machine operates, you can control the performance, right? You can give it the right fuel. It's unleaded versus premium, right? So part of that framework is I call it the driving mechanisms of the mind, or the drivers, like a computer driver for a program, right? You need the specific sort of coding. Once you understand the coding for a specific program, then you can understand how the program works, because it just follows certain rules, right? So the aspects of the mind are all, there's a collection of driving programs that are at any one point in time controlling your thought and focus, right? You have the the ego, you have the emotional matrix, you have the rational matrix, you have the sex drive, you have the intuition, right? And there's probably other ones, and as I've reflected on it further in life, I think that those are just sort of conceptualizations of programs that are running to control certain bodily systems, right? Each one of those things is like controlling some sort of bodily system in a way, or macro, controlling systems. So, you probably have that for, your other systems as well. But at the time, it was those 5 driving mechanisms, right? And so he kind of goes in the book about and explains how each one of those things works. Well, once I understood how each one of those things works, I understood how they sort of fit together and worked in congruence. And then I became, let's call it ego conscious, right? I became conscious of the ego within myself, and that's and the ego's influence on my thought and action, therefore. So that then facilitated, while I'm in deep states of meditation, this process, which so we have the tendency to remember things not as a matter of fact as the way they happened, but through our interpretation, our emotionally, or through the ego of what happened. And so we put this like tag on them. It's like metadata for the memory, right? We put this metadata memory tag on it of like how we feel about it, right? And then we like recall the memory, or something triggers it to be recalled, and then we feel that emotion again, or we feel that ego response again. And a lot of people just do this unconsciously throughout their life, and they don't understand why they're angry, and they're like angry about something that happened like 15 years ago, right? It's just like boiling up because somebody like did something that triggered it. Well, because I became ego and emotional conscious, in the self, when I was in these deep states of meditation, I would lay in shavasana. When I was laying in shavasana every night, all of a sudden, all of my past memories started coming up and were getting recontextualized, and the layer of the ego, or the layer of the emotional tag that was imbued upon it, was being removed. And so it was like it was like recataloging every memory I ever had, and it was just happening automatically. It's like an automatic, I think, function of becoming self-aware. And and this happened for weeks, if maybe even a month or two, where just every night it was a Rolodex of memories just coming up and being recontextualized, and then being restored back in. And then at the tail end, it was like there's like, like the traumas from youth, that it was like emotional scar tissue that wasn't exactly a memory, but it was like a pain or a feeling that got stored, right? And so then that had to be handled in a different way, where it was going into a deeper state of meditation, and then the pain or the feeling would come up as like a in a symbolic representation, and then I had to deal with that way. And through the course of that whole process, I clarified my mind, of all of those sort of triggered response patterns from memories and emotions that I was consciously aware of, that were causing me pain in the present from the past up to that point. And that wasn't everything. Obviously, there's stuff that's we're not consciously aware of from before we're able to store memories, and stuff we're not consciously aware of as it's happening when we're young, or even as adults. So, but everything I was consciously aware of, I processed then and clarified it, and it was just this automatic thing that happened in the monk sort of phase. And I would say that, to my understanding, I would say that's like becoming ego conscious, and becoming like, a degree of enlightenment is like becoming aware of all of that within, so that you can then make better decisions and not be tied to the past in the present, moving forward. And I would say that's like the sort of the crescendo of the monk phase. And then from there, it was like, okay, do I want to just keep going into the void, or do I want to interact with society again, and to your point, help people, or be impactful, or even just be present in this form. um and that's what I chose to reintegrate. And that was a painful process. That was very difficult to sort of pull myself out of. And because we've talked about this, and I know you've gone through something very similar, pulling yourself out of a phase of inner reflection that is sort of in isolation, to then reintegrate and interact with society in like a normal fashion, is very, very challenging and painful in certain ways. So, but I did it. And, since then, it's just been kind of a dance of trying to perpetually learn and grow and clarify that inner self, and remain at peace within, even though I'm interacting with a lot of unconscious, people, or experiences, um, in day-to-day life. And I don't want that to sound too like heady. Like, I don't want like somebody to say, oh, you think this about yourself. It's just, there is a lot of that sort of unconscious, the things out, the way people can trick themselves into believing things that aren't true, that I was witnessing as a child. It still happens today. And so that is what is sort of the challenge to deal with, when you're as someone in pursuit of sort of like truth. So, yeah, so that was the monk phase, basically.
Well, dude, thank you for expressing. If you're listening to this, I just want to echo what Mark's saying. Like, I don't think I've had my experience articulated so well. You've expressed in a way that I've experienced literally everything that you're saying. I think as human beings, we go through a similar journey. It's inner through the inner self, and so all of what you're talking about when you're in your memories, that's exactly what's happening to me in the float tank. So I feel like I'm understood for the first time again. Like, it feels nice to hear you express. So for the listeners, I just want to echo what you said and say I feel the exact same.
Yeah, and that's an excellent reflection because, when I was doing this, it was literally an art of Xing out all distractions, right? I was, instead of a float tank, I had all the lights off, I had doors locked, and I had earplugs in. It's the same thing.
Yeah, that's so cool. So let's switch gears a little bit. Thank you for going so deep. If you haven't learned from that section, there's a lot in there. So go back and listen to that section if you're looking to deepen your aspect of self. So I don't know if you would identify, but when we first met, you were literally the first digital nomad I've ever come encounter with. I was so inspired by you. I was like, these guys are in Costa Rica surfing, and then he's upstairs working in the hammock. Like, what is this? Like, I've only worked labor jobs. So how does one go from like being a monk and all that, and then now managing your own company and becoming, essentially digitally independent? Yeah, what's that like, and how did you do that?
Well, I leveraged inherent talents and like a background skill set, right? So like all through college, I was working in accounting. Since I was like 18, 19, I was working in various accounting roles and worked in various accounting roles all the way through college to the point where I graduated. I was a staff accountant. And then, after I did the monk phase, I wasn't really passionate about doing it, but I knew that that was something I could maybe rely on to find a job that would be well paying, where that wasn't manual labor. Where like I was actually, the first job I took after the monk phase was delivering furniture. So I went and did that manual thing, and like I sort of damaged my body in certain ways, and I was like, okay, this isn't it. I was rejecting the corporate sort of grind, and so I was like, and also it was at that time when the economy had tanked, in the Great Recession, so there wasn't a whole lot available. But I was able to sort of over a period of time sort of shift back into doing accounting work, and then I was working in a job for several years in an office. I was required to be in the office 80% of the time, so I sort of worked it out where I was like working remote 1 day a week. And I knew because I'd seen other people doing it, that I mean, I was just working on a computer. There was no reason I needed to be in an office, zero, except for somebody to like watch over my shoulder, right? And so I was already kind of, about for a couple years, sort of in the mindset of like, I'm going 100% remote, and it's just a matter of time. Um, if I can't do it with this job, then the next job, like I'm only going to do 100% remote work here on out, because I don't want to be stuck in an office. I can't do it. It's, for me, kind of, I'm an extremely outdoors person, like extremely outdoors person, and being stuck in an office 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, just was it for me, soul crushing. So, um, so basically, I quit my. There was a bunch of other stuff going on in my life personally, and I won't get into all that, but basically, I was at this crux where in 2016, I was ready to leave. I left my job. I was leaving an apartment. I was having difficulties with my, longtime friend that I was living with, just because we were living together, and, petty like roommate stuff. And it's all good now, but like, relationship problems with him, with my partner at the time, and also in my work. And I was like, man, I'm miserable on all aspects of my relationships in life: work, romantic, friendship. Like, I need to get the f out of here, right? Like, I need some change. And so,
And sorry, I just want to stop you there for the listeners too, because this is a really interesting point. Just because Mark did all this deep work in the monk phase doesn't make him immune from the world. And that's exactly what's happened to me too. So I just wanted to add that in. It's like, look, he went and did this whole monk phase, and then he's still experiencing these things in the world. I think what happens to people that don't do the self work is that they think like if someone that does, it's like, oh, you just must be good now. And it's like, absolutely not. So sorry, keep going. So you at this crux in life, and then what happened?
Yeah, so I was at this crux where I started doing some more work. I thought I was good when I was done with the monk phase. And then I had a couple years there where I very consistently and quickly learned that I wasn't good. Like there was still more work I needed to do. There was stuff happening on an underlying, a subconscious level with, thought patterns and choice patterns from, basically those traumas in youth that I just wasn't even aware of. And so I started doing some work. I hired a coach slash hypnotherapist for a couple months, and that was very helpful. I kind of like was in a crisis state. I had a partner who was going through addiction, and I was at a crisis state where like I was just totally spent emotionally and physically from that whole, trying to like trying to help someone that you love to like get better, and you just can't do it, and it's like going, it's not working, and doing that for an extended period of time is very draining. And so I got to this point where I was like very drained, and she helped the coach slash hypnotherapist helped pull me out of crisis. And then I started to, we started to get a little deeper into it, and I recognized, okay, like I have these thought patterns that are things that I've been thinking that are like negative and counterintuitive and counterproductive to my happiness. And so like, we went in and like I was able to clear one of those that was like very pronounced. And then that allowed me to stop being fearful of leaving relationships that were dysfunctional. Right? I was engaged in all of these relationships that were dysfunctional, and I was scared to leave them. And by clearing this program that I was running, that in my head I was saying like, you never, no, you're never fully safe in any relationship or situation, right? There's always impending doom. Like I was thinking that all the time. Once I cleared that, and then I went and sort of went out into the world and had some really formative outdoor adventure sort of experiences where I was like jumping off cliffs in the Grand Canyon and hiking up into Joshua Tree and getting stranded in the mountains before, sunset, and like having to take like giant leaps of faith off of a rock where like I thought I was going to break my leg, and I ended up like, not. Having to take leaps of faith in physical reality allowed me then to, within a couple days, take leaps of faith in my relationships. And so like, 2 days later, I quit my job. I decided I was going to move. I had no plan. I just was like done and ready to go. And so I took these leaps of faith, and without a parachute, I just had no plan. I was just like, you know what? I don't have a plan, but none of this is making me happy, and I don't want to do it anymore. So I need to make the change. And after I make the change, I'll figure it out. So, so that's what happened to me. And then, then shortly thereafter, within like before I even left, I was gonna basically leave Los Angeles and get on the road and go check out Austin and Nashville. And there was an accident that happened. The ex was in a car accident, and that like sort of like delayed my whole like process. But the point is, when I quit my job, then within a couple weeks, I got a call from some friends that own this company, and they said, "Hey, we need somebody to take over the finance." And I was like, "All right, I'll do it." But the one requirement is that I have to be 100% remote, because I just cannot I can't force myself to go work in an office 24/7 anymore. And I'll do it, but that's my one requirement. And obviously worked out like pay and all that, but that was the thing. So it was just sort of a knowing where I was at and knowing what was possible, and just knowing that like, look, you don't need to be like I do finance. I don't need to be in an office at all. I don't need to be physically interacting with you know um, people in an office in order to get my job done. I just need a computer. And so that was the transition point. And, that wasn't the only thing I did. I also, had several other employment opportunities spring up, and I was, experimenting with uh, digital marketing and all that kind of stuff. And so we talked about all of that in the past. But that was basically the transition. It was getting to a point where I knew that this other thing was possible, and then putting myself in a position where when an opportunity came up, I was able to just take it and move forward, and sort of knowing my requirement of that I have to be 100% remote to allow for me to do what it is I've been doing for the last 5 years.
So just to kind of hone in on this, what was like the mindset through this transition that you acquired? So what did you believe before this all happened? And then in the transition, what was the mindset you acquired in that transition and now that you now know because of this experience?
Well, the mindset that I had before was sort of it was very fear driven in terms of employment and relationship. It was the fear of loss was greater than the call to action. And then when I cleared that program and was doing the inner work in 2016, the call to action began to outweigh the fear of loss. And so, I mean, I'm a mathematical person in general. And so, like, for me, it's like an equation, like that side of the, greater than, less than, that's kind of what it was. It was the desire for happiness and growth and positive forward momentum began to outweigh any trepidations of of lack of employment or loss of relationship. And that's the biggest difference in terms of mindset is seeing that. And then it's been a several year process of kind of refining that and getting it to a point where that's what I'm living in now 24/7. That was like the beginning, right? And then I'm still sort of working through stuff over for several years and still engaged in relationship patterns and all that. And then getting to a point where, like, I'm working on stuff again consistently for like a year and a half in a very active, focused way to propel myself forward. Whereas now it's like, I know my, I know, I know my requirements, I know my value, and I know what I need to do in order to maintain forward momentum. And so my whole focus now is again on forward momentum, like it was in the monk phase, but with the reintegration with society, it was like kind of I in a way sort of consciously forgot or like consciously denied some of those lessons that I learned because I thought I needed to in order to interact with people in a like normal sociological setting. And so the last couple of years, it's been sort of stripping away those things that I was imposing upon myself. And so now I'm like doing everything every day. I'm like trying to be as consciously and mindfully aware of my choice patterns and whether I'm doing things unconsciously in a triggered or patterned way, conditioned patterned way, versus just being free and open to possibility and forward momentum.
Man, that's so awesome. I'm so happy for you, brother. That's glad to see you doing the deep work. So let's say someone's in your position in 2016 and they want to get to where Mark is in 2021. What advice would you give them? And what action step did they take to getting to where you are today?
Well, first and foremost, I would say don't try to replicate anyone else's path, right? Like, we're all individuals, and this is my path. But if you are seeing things that you want to incorporate into your life, I would say seek truth and answers to questions that you have, right? Like, if you're in sort of entrenched in a pattern of being, or you're unhappy, or you're not, you don't feel like you're where you want to be, um, or having experiences that you want to have, question, why am I in this place now? Why am I having this feeling, and why am I, it's the why. With everything, it's the why. Even now, it's in order to dismantle and understand our conditioned patterns, we have to ask ourselves, why do we feel this way? So for anyone that is in that position and is sort of meditating on this stuff or meditating on a change, the biggest thing you can do is start the inner work to answer, why do I feel this way, and why am I living this way, and that might be that might be facilitated and enhanced your ability to understand that through proper diet, all organic healthy foods in balance, uh, yoga, uh, therapy, um, you know physical fitness, outdoor experiences and meditation, pranayama, breath work daily. um, all of these things are things that I employ on a daily basis in order to maintain this state of being and move forward, because it's not a destination. Like, even now, like I'm trying to move, I'm trying to amplify my forward momentum. And so it's the understanding of the self and awareness and enlightenment are an active practice. It's not, there's no destination, right? It's by figuring out what amplifies you on a daily basis and helps you clarify your inner turmoil and amplify your inner understanding. You can move forward. So any of those things I mentioned, reading, tons of reading. There's plenty of books out there. I'll give you, Matt, a list if you want to put it in the detail, of like basically this list of books I've recommended to like 35, 50 people at this point. I've just sort of like rudimentary. These are the books I read. And all of them in conjunction helped me facilitate this sort of awakening. So I'd say reading and meditating and trying to understand. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man. Like, and again, like I second and echo what Mark's saying here. This is an absolute, I think, foundation to studying self and getting into deeper senses of understanding self and like, who am I? What do I stand for? What don't I stand for? Asking these deeper questions, and by doing like what Mark was saying, physical activity, meditating, yoga, breath, being in nature, these things help facilitate getting clarity on these answers. So thank you for that. So let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about your big passion. I know this guy's got some crazy fingers on the guitar. I've heard some of your music, man. It's amazing. So not only does Mark have all this side of himself, this is why I'm super infatuated by you. You have like all this part side of yourself with the deep inner work. Then you've got your financial business running operations, and then in between all that, underneath this has been this like song that Mark's been singing, and your words are so powerful in your music. So talk to me a little bit about your music. What's going on with your music? I know that you've been on a mission to help people through music and their healing.
Yeah. Well, I've perpetually been writing music since I was a kid. In one way, shape, or form or another. Um, you know, both my parents were musicians. I picked up a guitar and started learning and started practicing in earnest and consistently from the age of 13. I didn't play any organized sports in high school, so I could literally play guitar like 3 to 6 hours a day. So like it was like very important to me, and I think before I found the answers and sort of the practices in all the stuff that we just mentioned, music was like the great catharsis for me. It was my place to find clarity and exercise or excise the inner turmoils of adolescence. And like waking up at like 2, not being able to fall asleep, and then like getting up and playing guitar for like 4 hours until like 5 in the morning. That was in the dark. Like that was a consistent thing in my life, all through my teenage years. So for me, it was always the go-to. It was always, I mean, it was always my medicine. It was the thing that was like the healer for me, when all I had was emotional expression and didn't have the maturity or context to understand the inner turmoils that I was experiencing as an adolescent. So that's what it means to me. And as I've grown, I've become more adept at additional aspects of music, which is like not just playing guitar, but also singing and writing and lyrics and songs. I mean, there was a period when when I was before I even started the monk phase, and actually through all of my adolescence, I was writing poems/songs in lyrical form without music. And I have a box at my mother's house that has probably 5,000 or 10,000 pages of lyrics that I wrote before I ever wrote a song, to music. So, I think my underlying intent was always to, my underlying intent has always been to understand the human condition, and then through music, I've found an outlet to express certain insights and also capture and excise certain emotions that either I've had or others have had, or things that I'm just sort of meditating on. And so with my music, that's what I'm doing, really, is trying to capture a feeling or an emotion in a song. And I mean, I released well, actually, when I was in the monk phase, I released an album. I have no I don't know where the files are. I don't know if whoever would have a copy of it, but like I gave out like a couple dozen copies of this thing. It was me like basically going back to square one, like kind of like constructing music from a rudimentary um, um, approach, for the first time when I was learning the theory when I was in the monk phase. Because before that, I was just playing guitar and improvising all the time. I just wanted to learn how to improvise on guitar. So I was able to figure that out as a teenager, and like could play all the Hendrix stuff and do some Van Halen stuff and like do all that stuff on the guitar. But I like lacked a certain framework of understanding the theory to allow me to then communicate the language of like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish with other musicians, and also like put it down on paper or in recording. So when I was in the monk phase, a big part of that whole evolution was studying music theory and trying to master sort of the rudimentary understanding of what that is and how it applies to what I'm doing. And so after that, well, I released this little like solo EP. It was like mostly like I had a bunch of Bob Dylan-y type like acoustic guitar and harmonica songs that were like folk and blues. And then I also had some like experimental feedback from the guitar that was like 4.5 minutes long as a single track, right? So it's like this sort of like combination of like rudimentary song structure and then like experimental guitar. And then my drummer friend who I'd been friends with and I was playing guitar or playing music with once since I was like 13 years old, the first guy I ever played music with, hit me up. He's like, "Hey, I just heard this thing. If you ever want to work together again, let me know." And he was like, one of my best friends in junior high and high school. And then we just sort of went away to separate colleges, and then, just sort of like we separated. But then this was the moment where we like came back together. So then after that, we started working together. And over the next several years, we recorded and released 3 albums as a band, the band, The Sonic Escape. And very content with all of that work. I was proud of all of it. We did the whole deal. We went into like professional studios and recorded the framework for a whole album in a single day. One time we did 12 songs in one day. This one time, and but I moved away from California, and so that made doing that project a little more of a challenge, and so consistently. So we still work together, and he's actually on my current stuff, but basically I shifted into also releasing stuff under my own name, and so very recently I released "Music Is My Medicine," which is also this hat, an EP in October of 2020, and so that's online everywhere. It's kind of like a blend of there's like some Hendrixy backwards guitar stuff, and it's like mixed with like poppy, the Verve style songs, and there's some stuff that's kind of like really, I don't know, I was going for some kind of like blend of Radiohead and Nine Inch Nails, and my focus is constantly evolving, and the music's always like taking on a different shape, and I'm like never really fully content. But it's like I recorded like 25 songs and released 6 for that album, right? And like so now I've recorded like another 20, but like I'm not happy with any of them, so I'm like working on enhancing certain aspects of my vocal delivery because I want to like do something new and sing in a certain style that like I haven't yet. So that's where I'm currently at. I'm working on writing new material that's more sort of more rock focused, sort of a little maybe. I'll still do a lot of experimental progressive guitar work, I think, but I'm working on a new form of vocal sort of delivery that I haven't really employed before. And yeah, that's like a long answer to a simple question, but that's where I'm at right now. The music can be found everywhere, and I have my website, markkelton.com. Same thing with the merchandise and all that kind of stuff. So, does that answer your question? Is that too much?
No, no, that's all. I mean, I think that's where someone is passionate is when they get lost in their passion. It's actually it's a great sign. It shows that I love getting lost in my passion. That's so awesome. It's such a great feeling. So as we're coming to the end of the podcast, we'll finish with where everyone can follow you and find you. But I want to finish with two questions. So, what is one question you wish people asked you more?
Where have you found the most growth? Where have you found the most growth today? Where have I found the most growth? I think today, having this conversation has been a high, and it's definitely, it's having conversations like this that allow us to then sort of reflect and maybe ask ourselves a few additional questions, leaving the conversation. Um, yeah, I think today it's been huge.
Amazing. Okay, and then final question. You only got one chance to talk to yourself when you were in the most amount of pain you've ever experienced. And you only got one chance to talk to that younger Mark. And then after that, you're out of this planet. You go to wherever you go to next. And you have an opportunity to share with him one insight, whether around the internal world or the mind. What would you share with that younger self to help him along his journey in the most amount of pain that he's ever been in? What would you say to him?
Don't accept the conditions of your reality as an endpoint for the self. That that there's clarity through the pain, or there's clarity once you understand where the pain is coming from. Do the work. Don't fear. Don't fear the inner work that's required to transition out of it. And the quicker you do, the quicker you'll be free of the pain. With that said, also, everything has a process of evolution, and nothing necessarily comes quick. And you are only ready to evolve when you're ready to evolve. And so, patience, and just the awareness that through understanding the why of the pain, you can, eventually move forward. And it's going to take work, and it might take time, but you can get there.
Yes, dude, I knew this was going to be good, but I didn't know it was going to be this good, man. I am, man, you got me goosebumps at the end of this. That's how you know we're in the right place at the right time. Dude, that's so awesome, man. If the listeners, dear listeners, if you haven't taken away something, definitely go back, especially in some of these parts of this conversation, because Mark has done the work and is doing the work. And what's incredible is we've just touched the surface of this man. So, for anyone listening that wants to connect with you, listen to your music, what are some ways that they can connect with you? And yeah, on what platforms?
So, my website is the best place to go, markkelton.com, www.markkelton.com. And then it's Mark Austin Kelton across the board on all the platforms. So Instagram, Mark Austin Kelton, Spotify, iTunes, all of that. It's Mark Austin Kelton. The album I just released is called Music Is My Medicine. So Mark Austin Kelton, Music Is My Medicine. You can look that up in the keywords and you'll find it. But there's links to it from my Instagram profile at Mark Austin Kelton and off of my website. And that's where everything's going to be updated moving forward. And there's merchandise there, and there's music there, and um, that's the best place to find me.
Amazing. Well, Mark, I appreciate it. I love that this was the first ever Inside Mentors Minds. I really feel like we got in there today. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking your time with me on the show and your time for others. And this is really what we're about here in the Inside of the Mentors Minds, is hopefully positively impacting people so that they can take someone's transformation and transform themselves. So, again, thank you for the listeners that are listening today. Thank you, Mark. And we'll see you next week on another episode of Inside the Masters Mentors Minds. Take care, everyone.